Here is something that most people have felt, but they have failed to name hardly. And this is that you are working very hard, even harder than your parents. You have more education than your parents did, and yet you are less financially secure than your parents were at your age. That to me, it's not really a personal feeling. That is a policy outcome. And for me, I feel like it can't be an accident. My guest today spent about 30 years managing billions of dollars in assets. And he has been in the financial world, the financial systems, well enough to understand exactly how it works. And it became frustrating for him enough that he went ahead and wrote a book explaining to people who have never studied economics. I mean, my guest and I have been in the financial world, and I think he explains this to people using simple language, using very, call it, the man on the street can understand the kind of language that he uses in his book that is called The Capital Offence. Why some benefits at your expense. You want to go out there on Amazon and everywhere that you get your books from and check out this. And for me, this title is not just rhetorical. This title is really speaking to a message that my guest holds strong to his heart. And we are going to explore most of that. And Paul Musson, you are welcome to the Clarity Mandate.
Well, thank you, Vivian. It's great to be here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to have you, and I look forward to getting your insights on the things that you have really been working on. And let's start from your life in the financial world. You manage billions of dollars over 30 years. And most people in your kind of position would want to write books. I mean, I have interviewed a lot of people in the financial world, and they write books about the financial markets, about how to invest, about retirement, and all those things, and how they got rich. But you wrote a book about how the system is rigged against most people. What did you see inside the financial system that really provoked you to the point of writing that kind of a book? Let's start there.
Yeah, okay. That's a great place to start. In terms of why other people didn't see things the way I did, I couldn't really say. I can obviously just speak for myself. And for many years, I had a do no harm attitude, and I still have that. In fact, I have a free weekly blog called Political Economy. And at the end of every blog, I sign off with be free and do no harm. And I think that if most people focused on being free, doing what you want to do, but ensuring at the same time that you're not inflicting any harm on anyone around you, either physically, of course, but financially or emotionally, if everybody focused on doing no harm, the world would be a much better place. And if you're being free and doing no harm, it's almost impossible not to have a beneficial impact on society. I really believe that. And so for years, I focused on not doing any harm, and I wanted to ensure that any material wealth that I had was a result of real contributions that I had made to society. I didn't want anything I didn't think that I hadn't earned. And so I've never played lotteries or anything like that. Nothing wrong with them, of course. Absolutely nothing wrong. But I didn't want to do that because if I had a big win, it would be perfectly legal and fair, and but I didn't earn it, and I just didn't want that. And so I've lived my life that way. And as an investor, I always felt that I was playing an important role in that I was taking my clients' capital and investing it in businesses that would put that capital to productive use to make the world a better place, hire more people, pay them more. And when all that is happening, it pushes the share price of that company up, and my clients make money, I make money. Everybody wins. That's the way free market capitalist system is supposed to work, and that you only benefit to the extent that somebody else is benefiting from your actions. But when I was being an investor and doing all of this, I started noticing that more and more people were benefiting by not contributing to the system. They were effectively benefiting at somebody else's expense. And it was central banks, in particular the US Federal Reserve, that was allowing this and enabling this to happen. But it's not a conspiracy theory, and I do believe that the US central bank thought that they were doing the right thing. They thought that by artificially driving asset prices higher through distorted monetary policy, that somehow, yes, the rich will get richer, but don't worry because the benefits will eventually trickle down to everybody else. Well, it hasn't happened. And the richer have just gotten that much more richer, and such to the extent now that the wealth disparity is really obscene. So I'll just give you a couple of stats here. In terms of total equities and mutual funds in America, the top 10% of Americans own 87% of stocks and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own 1%. So that's where we've gotten to. Now, there should be wealth disparity based on your contributions. If you own a bike shop and you make 10 bikes a week, and I own a bike shop and I decide I only want to make one bike a week because I'd rather go bird watching and watch TV, and these are very personal decisions, then your wealth should be 10 times what my wealth is. There's nothing wrong with your wealth did not come at my expense. I'm not worse off because you decided to make 10 bikes. That's the way wealth disparity is supposed to happen. But increasingly it's gotten wider because the extra wealth was actually taken from somebody else. And so when I saw this happening, I got very angry, very frustrated. Over the years, my eyes were opening up. I was very naive at first. And when I used to talk to my clients about this, they would tell me, "You're the only one who talks about it like this in language that we can understand. And you should really write a book about it." And so over the years, I would hear that now and then. I finally decided, yeah, I think maybe I should. And it's not easy writing a book, obviously, especially when you're working full time. And so I could only write on holidays and stuff like that. And it took me about 5 or 6 years. But I'm glad I did. And now my full time job is communication and trying to empower people with truth, knowledge, understanding, and empower them with a voice that can hopefully affect positive change and change our current system because we're on a path that is not sustainable and will not end well. So we
Wow.
better do something about it soon.
Wow, that is so powerful. Thank you, Paul. I call myself a transformation economist because I spent close to 2 decades as an economist in South Africa. And South Africa being a country that came from apartheid and being what is still branded and even today the most unequal society in the world. I started a project there that I called the Black Advancement Index, where I came up with indices to measure inequality. So, what you are talking about, Paul, is something that is close to my heart, and I have done research and contributed to really getting national discussions about this specific topic. But let's focus on what you've been doing. You argue, like you've just explained, that these central bank policies, especially quantitative easing, and near zero interest rate over the past many years, 15 or more, was really aimed at making housing unaffordable. I'd like you to speak about walk us through this mechanism and especially relating to the housing market, because myself and many other parents out there having children that are getting out of college and starting jobs and cannot afford to get a house of their own. Can you walk us through how this has led to this kind of challenges in the housing market?
Yes, absolutely. This is probably the most important issue facing society, like Western societies, I would say. So, going back when the US stock market was flying in the 1990s because of the dot-com craze, technology craze, there was a real wealth effect happening in that companies were more productive because of the internet and stock markets were rising. People felt wealthier because their stock portfolios were going up in value, so they would spend more money. And so that's what central banks call a wealth effect. And then the dot-com bubble crashed, and then there was a negative wealth effect. People felt less wealthier, so they spend less. And then around 2001, 2002, some commentators were telling the US Federal Reserve that they should start a new wealth effect, but this time create a wealth effect in the housing market rather than the stock market. More people own houses than stocks, and more people will feel wealthier and borrow, extract equity from their homes and go spend it. That will drive GDP and all this kind of stuff. And so that's what they did. They first Alan Greenspan and then Ben Bernanke, who were the heads of the U.S. Federal Reserve at the time, took interest rates down to 1% in an economy that was still growing. By 3, they were down to 1%. These would be considered emergency interest rate levels. We must be at war or something. No, the economy was still growing. They had a different motive and kept them low for too long. Drove housing prices higher. You had that crazy speculative housing bubble in the 2000s. And sure enough, people were extracting hundreds of billions of dollars each year from their homes and spending it. SUVs, an extension on the house, whatever. And GDP was growing. But all GDP is a measure of final spending. It doesn't tell you why that spending is happening. So if that final spending is happening because people are putting capital to productive use, creating more capital, that capital now is your wherewithal for spending, then your spending is sustainable because you keep creating more capital. But if you're spending because you just keep borrowing more on your house, you need the price of your house to keep going higher to sustain your spending. And if it doesn't, your spending stops and the GDP stops. So that was their plan, and they thought this was all really good. It's not. It's terrible. Now, a house has no business going up in price. Now, earlier I was saying that I only want to benefit to the extent that somebody else has benefited from my actions. In a free market capitalist system, whatever wealth you have is supposed to reflect wealth that you've created and others out there now have. So you're both better off. The way I like to think about it is you make a bike. You create capital. I make a suit. I've created capital. We exchange them with each other. I've got your bike. You've got my suit. The economy is one bike and one suit better off now. And very importantly, nobody suffered from that. Nobody had anything taken from them, right? Now, our house, we live in a suburb of Toronto. We bought this house in 2001. Because happened to buy it when the central banks around the world, led by the Fed, started these policies. And so our house has gone up 4 times in price. But our house is not a productive asset. Our house is not producing 4 times as much stuff as it did 25 years ago. It hasn't grown 4 times in size. It hasn't relocated to a location that's 4 times nicer than its current location. It's the same economic good, the same capital. So we make 4 times on our house because somebody else has to transfer their capital to us. We make 4 times on our home at the expense of somebody else because they have to transfer their capital into our bank account. And so we're benefiting at somebody else's expense. It's not that somebody else out there is also 4 times better off. So this is not free market capitalism.
Wow.
Now, I don't believe that the central banks deliberately set out to price the next generation out of the housing market. I just don't think they thought it through. They just thought, well, house prices go up, people extract equity, they spend it, it's good for the economy, then people will hire more people and they'll make more money, and somehow the incomes will increase or keep pace with the higher prices of houses. And, it didn't work. There's no way it could work, but they convinced themselves that it would. And so here we are, where a generation is priced out of the housing market, or a good part of it. And what makes it worse is that policymakers convinced people like me, baby boomers, I'm 64, convinced us to rely on the inflated uh, price of our homes for our retirement. And so what happened is that we all saved less than we otherwise would have, because we thought, well, I don't have to save as much now because I can rely on my house for my retirement. It keeps going up in price. And so we all saved less than we would have done otherwise. So over the years, there was less money being saved and invested, more money consumed. And when you consume more and save and invest less, then the economy produces less stuff than it otherwise would have. So it's not like the economy stopped. There's still good things going on in the economy, but it's nowhere near as strong as it would have been if we hadn't all been taught to rely on the inflated value of our homes for our retirement.
Wow, this is interesting. I mean, you want to read Paul's blogs, you want to listen to him because he is breaking down some of the numbers and some of the statistics that we just hear about, and we're excited. Everyone is waiting for the release of the statistics, whether it's GDP, whether it's this. But the question that Paul really asked, which if you have never asked that question, it's time to start asking, what does this GDP really mean? What does it really mean? It's just measuring the final expenses. Did it mean that we produce more wealth? Did it leave more people better off? These are the kind of questions that my guest ask, and you want to know more about this. But let's talk more about your blog. Your blog post covers what you call the war on cash. As you know, as a specifically bad thing for younger and less wealthy people. Most people think cash is just like something you have less of because, I mean, we're living in the world. I don't know, like my kids, apart from the maybe the quarters and the little change that we have at home, they've not really experienced cash the way we did in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Like,
Yeah.
cash is almost every child, I think, even the babies know about credit cards and all kinds of things uh, that we have this day. So the question to you, Paul, is why is the decline of cash a fairness issue, not just a convenience issue?
Yeah, so one of the main issue, or my main concern with the decline of use in cash, is that it will then give policymakers the opportunity to take even more of your capital from you. Now, we'll just back up a little bit so your listeners will understand. People have to differentiate between capital and money. Both very important, but not the same thing. So capital is anything that you produce, a good or a service. So let's say you produce 10 bikes. I like to use bikes so everyone can understand better. So you've just created 10 bikes of capital. That's capital. Now, you might exchange those bikes with somebody else in a barter type situation, but it's hard to do that, right? So instead, we have indirect exchange. We use money. So you first sell your bikes for money. So let's say $1,000 each. Now you have $10,000 in cash. So you put that in your bank account. What that $10,000 is effectively doing, it's temporarily storing up the 10 bikes of capital that you produced. It's a store of value. So when you go and spend that $10,000, what gives you the wherewithal, or what gave you the wherewithal to go and buy something was the fact that you created 10 bikes. You had to create 10 bikes first before you could go demand something from somebody else. So your 10 bikes are stored up in that money. Now, when, let's say, before you get a chance to spend that $10,000, the central bank doubles the money supply. When they do that, they do not create any capital to create that money. They just create the money out of thin air. It has no capital stored up in it. But as soon as it comes into the economy, it extracts capital from the rest of the money already in existence. So that the doubling of the money, when it comes into the economy, it takes 5 of your 10 bikes from your $10,000 and puts it into the newly created money. So now your bank statement says that you still have 10 bikes or $10,000, but it only stores 5 bikes instead of 10. And so your $10,000 is worth half as much, and it will only buy half as much as it would have done before the central bank doubled the money supply. So that's the difference between cash and money, or cash and capital. Now, the reason central banks or some policymakers want to get rid of cash is because if the economy is weak enough, they want to be able to take interest rates deep into negative territory because they think that's going to be stimulative for the economy. It's terrible for the economy.
We hear that the interest rates are too high.
No, they're not. They're almost normal. They're actually a little bit below normal. But they would want to take interest rates to, let's say, minus 5%. But if they did that, they know that everybody would just take their money out of the bank. Because why would you leave your money in the bank at negative 5%? You'd have to pay the bank 5%
to keep your money.
in the bank for the privilege of lending the bank your money. So people would take their money out of the bank, and that wouldn't be good for the system. But if there's no such thing as cash anymore, then your bank account, let's say you have $10,000 in there, and interest rates are minus 5%, you're going to have to pay the bank $500 a year because you got $10,000 in your checking account, or you would take that money out and spend it and consume, which is what governments like you to do, or buy an overpriced home or invest in overpriced stocks to help drive stocks even higher. They would like that too. So they want you to consume your rather than save it. And so this is the danger of not having any cash.
Wow. That is so, so profound because many people don't get it as you really bring the economics to the ordinary person on the street doing bikes, like you put it, really manufacturing bikes. And I like your approach to this. And I want you to go even deeper. You use the phrase wealth inequality is exploding. And many people might not really understand specifically how this happens. I would like you to walk us through exactly how wealth transfer from the bottom 80% to the top 20% in modern world really looks like without using words like inequality. I would like you to simplify it in a way.
Sure. The central banks, the term I like to use is about 25 years ago, they started sacrificing the real economy on the altar of higher asset prices. So driving asset prices higher, houses and stock markets became their raison d'etre, if you will, became their prime goal. And they used to do it first through very low interest rates, either near zero or zero. And then they started quantitative easing, printing trillions of dollars, buying mortgage-backed securities and 10-year treasuries through something called the portfolio effect that eventually drives stock markets higher. But two things happen when you rapidly increase the money supply. So first of all, you distort what's called the price discovery mechanism. Now, it's not that
Mhm.
complicated. I'll
Mhm.
explain it. So the price discovery mechanism is in capital markets is people making their own risk return assessment. So like if you're going to lend me $10,000, you're going to make an assessment on me and my ability to pay you back that $10,000. And if you think I'm a deadbeat, then you probably won't lend me the money, or you might charge a very high rate of interest, 25% or something. And if you think I'm really good for the money and I can be trusted, you might only charge me 5% for the money. So when you have millions of people and corporations all making their own risk return assessments while investing money or borrowing money, it results in what's called like a natural rate of interest, which results in the best investment of scarce resources, the best allocation of scarce resources investment. And so you get the most productive economy. But when central banks drive interest rates lower and lower to drive asset prices higher and higher, because that's what they do, then you're taking the interest rate further and further from the optimal rate. So there's less and less stuff being produced, less and less, fewer and fewer jobs being offered out there for the average Joe, for the average worker. So that's the first thing. Second thing is when they print money to drive asset prices higher, it results in inflation. So your wages are not your real wages are not going up like you think they are. And inflation is understated, in my opinion, and the opinion of lots of other people. And so the prices of things are growing faster than your income. So your income will buy, even though it's going up, will buy less and less stuff each year than it otherwise would have done. And so the jobs aren't as plentiful, and your wage and your savings, your capital is being extracted from them each time they increase the money supply. So you're worse off in that way as well.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. Thanks for really breaking that for our listeners. And I hope someone out there is beginning to think twice because think about it. You look at your increase in salaries and you look at your wages going up, but your life doesn't get better. It should ring a bell. And that's what Paul argues about the fact that in real terms, there is the numbers that you see on the bank statement, and there is the real impact of what that money can buy from the shops, or think about the bikes, the cars, or anything that would actually help you to fulfill your needs, whether it's personal needs, family needs, career needs. But this is interesting. You want to go and read more of Paul's blog and get more of the details. But let's move forward to your book. You deliberately wrote Capital Offence without graphs. You wrote it without using academic jargons. For me, that's a choice that many economists and writers that have been in the financial world, like yourself, for the length that you have been, would hardly ignore using things like graphs and economic jargons and all that. The question is, what did you have to give up in terms of maybe precision, the way that graphs, I mean, when we look at demand and supply and all the fancy graphs, what did you have to give up in terms of economic and professional precision in order to make your work more accessible? And what did you gain in return? What kind of feedbacks have you been getting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I haven't had that question before, so thank you. First of all, I would say that most people, when they write about this stuff, they're writing about it for people like me who can understand all that or most of it anyways. And that's all fine. But the reason I didn't do that is because my goal was not to communicate with people like me who were already in the finance industry. My goal is to help change things. There's an old saying that the people always get the government that they deserve.
Right.
But that's only true if the people really understand what's happening and then can vote and demand accordingly. And so I don't think that the average person really does understand what's going on and so cannot demand the right actions from our policymakers. And it's not because the average person is not smart enough. They are. I think the average person is very smart, particularly when it comes to what they should be doing with their own hard-earned capital, their own skin in the game. And I liken it to somebody asking you a question, but they ask you in Greek. You can't answer it. It's not because you're not smart. You just don't speak Greek. And so my goal is to try and help people understand. And so I use very easy to understand terminology. I use analogies, stories, and I go slowly, step by step. In a situation like this, I cut corners and stuff like that. We don't, but in a book, slowly, carefully, because I want to empower all these great, smart people. People are out there working every day, raising families. They're very smart people. And only when they start voicing their opinion will policymakers start doing the right thing, because the policymakers are not bad people. But to do the right thing today would be political suicide, because they and certain academics have convinced us all that there's such thing as a free lunch, that we can have our cake and eat it too, that if we take more out of the system than we put in, it doesn't come at somebody else's expense. Yes, it does. You just can't see who it is. And so that's why I wrote it the way that I did. There is only one. But I avoided putting a whole bunch of charts in there for a couple of reasons. Um, One, it tends to be a crutch that, not always, but you put a chart in there and you hope, okay, well, that's self-explanatory. No, you got to be able to write about it and describe it and explain in easy to understand terms, like to prove to yourself that you really understand what's going on. And charts also can be very intimidating, and people to see a bunch of charts that, oh, I can't figure that out. No, but I'm going to listen to the story that Paul is telling me. What The other part of your question was, what did I think I had to give up by not having charts in there? And I guess it would be some proof points. Um, yeah, I guess that's what it would be. I've got a few tables, but not many. But I do have sources where people can go and check these sources for themselves so they can see I'm not making it up, right? But I guess that would be it. And for those who like charts and whatnot, sometimes those charts can be very helpful as a really stark visual. Oh my God, I didn't realize it was that bad. Sometimes you can get things clearer on a chart than you can in a written word. But that was a path I decided to go down, and yeah, that's why I did it.
Wow. I like you to finish the question by maybe sharing with our audience what kind of feedback did you get or are you still having by doing the book the way you did?
Yeah, so I've had very good feedback. Like, I'm proud to say. I've had some people say that they read a lot of books on economics and they learned more from this than any other book they've ever written or ever read, sorry. So that's great. Other feedback I've had, including the publisher, when they decided they wanted to publish it, it's published by a company in England. And these people said that I never expected a book about economics to be a page turner. Like, when I finished a chapter, I couldn't wait to get to the next chapter to see what was going on or to see where this was going, where it was leading. And I didn't really try to make it a page turner per se. I just tried to make it interesting enough so people would stick with it and that they would actually understand, what the hell is going on out there, you know?
Oh, that's powerful. Thanks. I think there would be a lot more feedback that you've had. And if you are listening to us, we are on the Clarity Mandate podcast. And Paul is talking about his book. You want to check it out. We're going to be putting details in the show notes. You want to check the book that talks about the world out there, the financial world. And Paul, you have been publishing your weekly blog. For me, I think the length of time that you've been doing this, it's really showing evidence of the fact that you are doing something quite sustainable. So for me, what is the most important thing you have changed your mind about in 30 years as a result of watching how the systems actually play out? When you went into the system versus when you came out of the system,
Yeah.
what changed your mind about?
Yeah, I think, again, I don't know if anyone's asked me that question before either. I think it would be the role that central banks play in an economy, the role that they do play, and the role that they should not play. And I think might have mentioned earlier, I was quite naive when I first entered the industry. I just thought that lower interest rates were good, better than higher interest rates or normal interest rates. I had no idea how distortive lowering interest rates was. I had no idea how that affected this transfer of wealth within society that was completely unfair. I think I gained a much greater appreciation throughout my career, um, about how the system should work, the fairness of it, where you create capital, exchange it fairly with others, doesn't come at somebody else's expense. Then the importance of understanding the true laws of economics that result in the greatest prosperity and the fairest distribution of that prosperity. But within that, it still doesn't mean that everybody benefits. There's still people who fall through the cracks, who never had the same opportunities that you had, either came from poor neighborhoods or broken families or mental health issue, whatever. And for those people, of course, then the more prosperous society is, the more better able you are to help them along to create their own capital. And for some people, they never can. So we want to be in a position to help them as well. So once we have the strongest economy, we can then impose on top of that our own ideology. And so we can help people. We want a moral society and all that kind of stuff. But people are, and I understand why they do it, but they don't like the laws of economics because the laws of economics can be very inconvenient. And so they try to change the laws of economics through fancy graphs and equations and that nobody can understand to prove that, yes, you can have your cake and eat it too. The government should take on deficits and more debt, and there's not going to be any consequences and all this nonsense. But it's not true. And some people liken it to getting angry at the law of gravity, like blaming gravity for plane crashes. Well, no, the law of gravity just is what it is. Let's not kid ourselves, right? So how do we make planes safe or as safe as they can be? And so, yeah, these are the things I think I learned. I was always a very realistic person, objective, or tried to be as objective as I could. But I was ignorant, really, of how things really worked until I got in there.
Wow. Thank you, Paul, for sharing so graciously those very important lessons with our listeners. Let's speak to a 28-year-old listener, professional that is listening to this episode right now. And she has a good job. She has various responsibilities, and she cannot afford to buy a home, maybe in New York City where she works. And she's not asking for sympathy because she's already working. She wants a framework. What does she need to understand about the system that she's inside? And what are the 2 or 3 most important decisions that she can take so that she becomes in a better position than many other professionals are already suffering?
Yeah, well, a lot of the answers to those questions are very personal. So we're all different. So if someone's living in New York City and they can't afford to buy a home, uh, I would not have been able to afford to buy a home in New York City either. And it's just an expensive city. It's a beautiful, amazing city. I absolutely love New York. I just don't know if I would ever have been able to afford to rent or buy there. So that would be the first thing, rent outside or buy outside and commute in. Be aware of how the system is working against you from an inflation perspective, how the money supply keeps increasing faster than the amount of stuff being produced in the economy. So prices are going up. They should not be. Prices should actually be falling in a properly working free market capitalist system, which is what happened in the US in the last 30 years of the 1800s. You had stuff being produced growing like crazy, money supply only growing 4% or so. Good deflation happened. So even if you had flat wages, you became wealthier every year in real terms. Um, you want to save. Don't give up. You hear a lot of this YOLO, you only live once, or FOMO, fear of missing out. And I understand a lot of young people say, look, with house prices the way they are, it's going to take me 15 years to save up for a down payment. And even then, I might not even qualify for a mortgage. So the hell with it. I'm just going to spend my money and live my life and go on trips and blah, 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 and have fun while I can. And I get it, but I would say don't give up, because I think they will become affordable. They're going to have to come down in price, which is not good for baby boomers like me, but this is what needs to happen. And so don't give up. Keep saving. Keep investing. Also live today. My wife and I have always said that life is happening now. So we've always tried to strike that balance. And I remember one of my clients, a financial advisor, told me a story about she had these elderly clients, and the husband passed away. He was a very good saver, and his wife had no idea about the state of their finances because he handled everything. And the advisor said, I couldn't wait for my client to come in so I could tell her that she wasn't going to have to worry the house is paid off and over $1 million in investments and blah, blah, blah. And so when she told her client, the wife, about the state of the finances, her client started crying. She was upset. And the advisor said, well, why are you upset? And her client said, all I ever asked my husband for was 2 weeks in Florida, but he wouldn't spend the money. So you got to strike that balance, right? But don't give up on either.
That's right. That's right.
Keep things real. Don't invest in any of these fly by night, sounds too good to be true, get rich quick schemes.
Mhm.
They are too good to be true. If those investment opportunities are that great, nobody's going to be sharing them with you. I'm going to keep it to themselves, right? Yeah, that's what I would.
Thank you, Paul. And I hope if you're a young professional out there, strike the balance, live the life today, be more prudent, understand how the system works, and make sure that you're also prepared for the rainy days ahead and for your retirement. But be real, be realistic. And like he puts it, everyone's situation is different depending on the state or the city that you are in. But let's talk about your blog. And you have a tagline on your blog: be free. And you mentioned it at the beginning: be free and do no harm. And for me, how do you hold together the argument that the system is structurally unfair, as you have really made the argument for, with a personal commitment to freedom rather than resentment or redistribution or some form of maybe communist kind of politics?
Well, the great danger is that we revert to socialism or something like that. And, you know, people are angry at capitalism, but it's not capitalism that is destroying the system. It's distorted capitalism, crony capitalism, whatever you want to call it. And so so socialists are right to be angry, but they've misdiagnosed the patient. And the danger is that they throw out the free market capitalist baby with the crony capitalist central bank fallacious monetary doctrine bathwater. And so that's what I'm trying to prevent from happening.
Wow.
And it wasn't, as I said earlier, I think the intentions were good, that the people in charge really believed that everybody would benefit from this. Yeah, maybe we'll get a little bit more wealth disparity, but don't worry, everyone will be better off. It hasn't happened. And when people are suffering because of your actions, it's hard to admit it. It's hard then to say, okay, well, we really shouldn't have gone down that path. We need to go down this other path. And we have to undo a lot of what we've already done. And it's going to be particularly painful. It's hard to make that decision because you will get blamed.
Yes.
But they're good people. I really do believe that. I'm not saying that there are no bad people. There's always exceptions. But for the most part, I think those who are in charge, our leaders, politicians, central bankers, they're good people.
Wow. Wow, I love the word you use. Don't throw the baby with the water. And capitalism, if done right, it's still the system that creates wealth. It's still the system that gives progress to the majority of the people. But we are dealing with a form of extreme capitalism and central bank policies that have rigged the system, for lack of a better word. And it seems like capitalism is failing. And like you put it, that is not the issue. And the diagnosis needs to be done right. So as we begin to round up, the name of this podcast is called the Clarity Mandate. And I believe that there is a moment in everyone's life where clarity stops being optional. When the gap between what people are told about the economy and what is actually happening to them becomes a form of reality, a harm that they can actually see. And you have spent 30 years plus watching this gap, watching this reality. What do you understand now about economic clarity? What is actually what it is in real terms, what it protects, and who it threatens, like you have put, that you could only have learned by sitting in these systems. You could never have learned these things otherwise. What is your biggest clarity moment walking through all this?
Yeah, I think so being an investor, it really is all about that. And when I started off being an investor and going to school and learning about it, I was really just thinking about how much money I can make through investing, how I can grow my investment. not thinking about sort of the real practical aspects of investing. What am I actually doing? Like, I'm taking my client's capital, who they spent their career either with their own business or working for someone else. They were adding value to society. They get rewarded with capital, and then they give it to me, and I invest it in other companies to create more capital to also benefit society. Everybody's better off, and everybody wins. I never really thought of that sort of mutual benefit that investing and property rights and all this kind of stuff really bring forth. And I started to understand it a little bit in my early career, um, and then as I was starting to understand it, that's almost the same time where central banks started to come in and sort of short circuit the system, if you will. And so it was sort of happening at the same time. And yeah, if I hadn't been an investor, yeah, I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast with you right now. Like I wouldn't have thought that way. And I've explained this, as you can imagine, to a lot of people over the years, including a lot of my friends and family. And a lot of people, so many people have said, you know what? I never thought about it that way,
That's right.
and either would I if I hadn't been in that industry. I don't think I would have. Yeah.
And this is a very incredible episode. I could go on and on. The lessons you want to read Paul's book. And this is someone who has been inside the system, the investment world for 30 years. I mean, he has come out of the system writing and educating the ordinary Joe, as he puts it, on economics without using chart, and talking about things that shapes life, talking about some of the things that we would never understand, the way that money, monetary policy, and central banks can affect you and I in our daily life. So Paul wrote Capital Offence, not just to make people angry. He wrote that book actually to make people understand and get more clarity on how the systems have been rigged to benefit some, while others are really not benefiting from the system. And to all our listeners out there who feel that the system has been rigged against them, is not working for them, I mean, Paul explains very clearly. You want to read Paul's book, and the language is simple, the mandate is clear. You want to go out there and have a look. And we would put details of Paul's book in the show notes. And thank you for joining us on the Clarity Mandate, Paul. And thank you, our listeners. And I will see my listeners in the next episode.